Sometimes the family you choose is the one fate don't ask your permission to bring. It don't knock, it don't explain, it just shows up, dragging cold wind and worse behind it. Out here, you learn not to open your door for every shadow that moves. The land teaches that, teaches it hard, teaches it with graves. Still, some things come anyway. No matter how many locks you bolt, no matter how many prayers you bury in your coffee each morning. And when they come, well, the good Lord don't always give a man a warning. Sometimes he gives him a choice. Some storms howl louder than others. Some don't make no sound at all until they're already inside. And some carry things with them that change a man forever. This one, it came with chains, and 2 small hands clinging to a woman wearing a steel bucket on her head. And it didn't leave the way it came. Snow cracked under his boots like brittle bone. The wind didn't whistle. It pressed, low and constant, like a breath that never warmed. The man moved slow but sure, like someone who didn't much care if the day finished or not. His coat was patched in 3 places, and his hat had a sag on one side from too many winters bent against the same wind. He carried no rifle, just an old axe with a handle smooth from years of hands that no longer held anything tight. He split wood like he breathed. Automatic, no fire behind it. Each log thudded into the snow with a dull finality. Stacking it neat against the side of the cabin, he paused only once, to rub the spot just above his ribs, where the scar still itched come cold. The cabin was squat, built more for withstanding than for living. One window had been replaced with rawhide stretched tight and nailed down. Inside it smelled of smoke, pine pitch and old sweat. He lit the stove with careful hands. The match burned too long before he dropped it. No rush. Nothing ever was. There was a locket on the shelf. Brass. Dull. Next to it sat a stack of letters bound with a piece of leather strap, never opened. Dust lay thick on both. He didn't eat at the table. He ate near the fire, crouched on a 3-legged stool, staring into the coals like he could see some answer inside him. The cot opposite his own sat untouched, the wool blanket folded square, pillow sunken with time but not use. Out back, half buried in snow, a cross stood in silence. It wasn't carved, just 2 lengths of antler tied with twine and driven into the ground deep enough not to fall. He passed it every day, never stopped, never spoke. Not out of peace. This wasn't peace. This was exile. And he wore it like his coat. Heavy, worn, and chosen. The wind turned violent just past sundown. One moment it whispered through the pines like it always had. The next it roared down the mountainside like it meant to take the whole forest with it. He'd seen storms come quick before, but this one came wrong. No warning in the sky, no shift in the birds. Just a sudden wall of white, and the kind of cold that made your teeth ache behind your eyes. He barred the door with both hands and shoved it till the hinges screamed. Snow started piling at the cracks, hissing as it melted on the stove-warmed wood. Then came the sound, distant at first, not wind, not tree, something scraping, metal or hooves. He pulled back the rag curtain and squinted out, nothing but swirling white. Then, a shape, dark, slow-moving, swaying. He didn't move, not at first. Then another shape behind it, smaller, no, 2. He grabbed his coat, heavy and stiff, and wrestled the door open just enough to slip out. The wind near knocked him flat. He staggered forward, hands up, squinting against the sting. A horse, near collapse, knees trembling in the drift. On its back, a figure slumped forward, woman-shaped. Her arms were bound unto the saddle horn with rope. Her head was covered with a dented steel bucket tied under the chin. Behind her 2 children huddled, half covered by the folds of her tattered skirt. One clung to the other. The girl looked up first, wide-eyed, hollow-cheeked. Her lips were blue. He stood there, breath steaming hard, torn between reason and instinct. The horse gave a final groan and dropped to its side, snow swallowing it. The boy began to cry, a thin, raw sound that barely made it past the wind. He moved, No words. No questions. He grabbed the woman under the arms and hauled her toward the cabin like a sack of grain. The kids stumbled after, half dragging the girl's frozen boots. Inside, he dropped her near the hearth, unlatched the bucket and rolled it aside. Steam rose from her head like smoke off a doused fire. He stripped the kids of wet things, wrapped them in blankets. The girl fought him until she saw the fire. Then she fell quiet. He did the same for the woman, careful but fast. Her wrists were raw beneath the rope. Her breath rattled in her chest. He stoked the fire high, filled the kettle, and shut the door tight against the wind still howling outside. No one spoke, only the crackle of flames and 3 lives thawing beside a man who'd stopped expecting company a long time ago. The fire popped low and steady, throwing shadows across the log walls like ghosts stretching out their limbs. The cabin smelled of wet wool, scorched beans, and smoke-stained pine. He moved quiet around them, not like a host, but like a man unsure what he'd just let inside. The woman hadn't said a word since she'd fallen through his door. She sat cross-legged on the floor near the hearth, wrapped in an old army blanket, her arms tucked close like she was still cold deep in the bone. The metal bucket lay near the stove now, catching heat. It was scuffed and bent along one side, like someone had struck it hard and more than once. The kids were half asleep on his cot, curled together under a bearskin. The girl stared at him longer than she should have, blinking, slow. The boy clutched her sleeve like a man twice his age might clutch a rifle. He ladled beans into 3 tin bowls, set 2 near the fire, and 1 off to the side for himself. They ate quiet. The boy wolfed his down, the girl slower. The woman didn't touch hers until the others had finished. Even then she picked at it like it might be poisoned. "You got names?" he asked, voice gravel dry. The girl nodded toward the woman. "That's Clara." Her voice was small, tight. "I'm Clara too, but they call me Little. He's Tommy." He glanced to the boy. Tommy blinked but said nothing, just kept staring at the fire like it held the only safety left in the world. The man gave a slow nod. "All right then." They didn't ask his name. He didn't offer it. After a long while, Clara shifted closer to the kids, checked their feet with care. She touched Tommy's forehead and then her own, like measuring something without words. Her hands were raw, rope burned at the wrists. He saw it, said nothing. The snow still beat the roof, slow and steady now. The wind had lost its teeth. He stood, moved to the door, and dropped the bar back into place with a soft thunk. The woman's eyes followed the sound. So did the girl's. Back by the fire, he sat with a worn rag and started wiping his rifle, though he hadn't fired it in months, just something for his hands to do. The girl crept toward him with a stick of charcoal she'd picked from the edge of the stove. She squatted near the wall and started drawing. Fast, sharp lines, dark and wild. He watched out of the corner of his eye. A cabin, 3 small figures, and 1 large one, alone at the far edge. A storm above, like claws. "Is this your house or your prison?" she asked. He didn't answer, just stared into the fire a long time. Later, he set up his extra bedroll near the stove. The kids were asleep, finally. Clara wasn't. She kept glancing at the door as if waiting for it to open again. He got up, checked the latch once more, then crossed to the table and slid his knife under his pillow like he'd done every night since the war. She saw him do it. Neither of them said a word. The cabin was warm now, but the cold, that stayed inside. The days slipped by slow, like syrup in the cold. The storm let up, but the cold stayed. Snow on the pines turned to crust, ice clung to the eaves, but inside the cabin, breath no longer smoked by morning. Fire stayed lit through the night now, fed by his steady hand and the girl's quiet help. She'd taken to sweeping, straightening the old wool blanket he never bothered with. Tommy started feeding the hens without being asked. Little Clara spoke more, sometimes even laughed when she watched the wind twist through trees like ghosts looking for homes. But he didn't laugh. He still woke before light, still chopped wood like it owed him something, still didn't sit at the table unless he had to. Most nights he ate at the stove, hunched and quiet, nodding now and then but speaking little. The children filled the silence with small things. Tommy asked where the stars went in the day. Little Clara sang under her breath when she brushed her tangled hair. They started calling him Mr., not Pa, not Sir, just Mr. It stuck. The woman, Clara, watched it all without comment. She spoke when needed, and only then, but she'd taken over the cooking, standing at the pot with sleeves rolled and jaw tight. He let her. It wasn't gratitude exactly. It was something more silent than that. She still hadn't said where they came from. He still hadn't asked. One night, while the wind ticked like nails against the glass, he sat at the table without meaning to. Just found himself there, a tin cup in hand, watching the girl draw again. This time it was the same cabin, but the figures were closer together. The man no longer stood at the edge. He watched her sketch it, eyes narrowed. "You ever have kids?" she asked, not looking up. He didn't answer, just sipped slow from the cup. "He had a boy," Clara said from the fire, voice low. "Saw his grave out back." The girl looked up wide-eyed. "What happened to him?" The room quieted so full you could hear the wind curling beneath the doorframe. He set the cup down. "Got sick. Fast." That's all he said. It wasn't the truth, not the whole of it, but it was enough for now. Later, little Clara brought him a piece of bark with a drawing burned into it. A man, a woman, 2 children, holding hands in front of a crooked little cabin. She handed it to him like a peace offering from a country not yet trusted. He took it without smiling, ran his thumb across the figures, set it on the shelf above the hearth where the locket used to be. That night, as the fire burned low, Tommy curled against him without asking, just leaned into his side like it was always that way. The man didn't move. The boy didn't stir again till morning. No one spoke of it. No one had to. The family he lost stared back at him from the eyes of the ones fate delivered. And whether he wanted it or not, they weren't ghosts anymore. The sun came out 2 days after the last frost. It hit the snow like it didn't care what it melted. The wind quieted, birds stirred in the brush again, and sap ran down the pine trunks like blood waking in old veins. He knew it meant they'd go. Folks like them didn't stay put long, especially not when the ground got soft again, when trails opened and wagons started rolling. The cabin had been a stop, not a place to land. He'd known it from the first time Clara looked at the door more than the fire. She packed slow, didn't say a word about it, didn't need to. Tommy folded his shirt with care and set it on the cot. Little Clara wrapped her drawing in cloth. They acted like they were going to church. No tears, no fight, just a quiet knowing. He chopped wood with more force than sense. Blade hit not, jumped, split wrong. He didn't stop, didn't speak, didn't look their way. When the sun fell behind the ridge and the cold came crawling back in, they still hadn't left. They sat around the fire, him on his stool, Clara near the children, arms folded. No supper cooked, just heat and silence between them. Little Clara looked between the adults, like she was waiting for someone to say it, whatever it was. "They'll need boots," he said finally, voice rough. "Roads slush down past Widow Creek." Clara nodded, slow. "I mended what I could. Could take the old mule. He ain't fast, but he don't mind hills." She looked at him, long and still. "You want us gone?" He didn't answer. The wind scraped the chimney. The kettle hissed on the stove. Later that night he stood by the door, hand resting on the latch, eyes on the dark outside. The others were asleep, or pretending. Behind him a floorboard creaked. She was there, wrapped in her blanket, hair falling loose over her shoulder. "You don't talk much," she said. "Never seen much sense in it?" Maybe the silence just got too quiet. He nodded once. She moved beside him, looked out the same way he did. "I ain't good with people," he said. "Ain't got much. What I do got, it's here. This land, this cabin, these hands." She watched him. "I ain't asking for nothing," he said. "Ain't making no promises. But if you wanted to stay, you could." "Why?" because no one should have to start over alone. Not again. She didn't smile, but something in her shoulders eased. Not all the way, just enough. "I'm not staying for you," she said. "I know." He stepped away from the door, let it go. It stayed shut. Outside, the world waited. Inside, something stayed. Not love, not yet, but something heavier, something that didn't move when the thaw came. The road into town was dry, rutted and mean. Dust kicked up from the mules' hooves and clung to their boots, their coats, their skin. It tasted like old secrets and sun-baked bones. They rode in slow, him in front, Clara and the children in the yellow. Ittle wagon behind, heads low. The town hadn't changed. It never did. Same crooked saloon sign creaking in the wind. Same old dog sleeping on the boardwalk like it owned the place. Same eyes from porches, watching with the kind of interest that don't speak welcome. He'd avoided this town for 2 winters and a harvest. Now here he was, dragging a woman with a past and 2 children that looked like they didn't belong to nobody. The general store bell rang when they stepped in. Mr. Dodd looked up, jaw set. Didn't say howdy, just nodded once and kept his hand near the register drawer. Clara picked out cloth and flour and a little blue ribbon for little Clara's hair. The girl stared at a row of peppermint sticks in a glass jar and didn't ask for one. The boy clung to her side like something might take her if he let go. At the counter, a woman with a stiff collar and a face set for church leaned close and whispered something sharp. Dodd glanced their way again, slower this time. "Wasn't she Tremblay's girl?" the woman asked, louder than she needed to. Clara froze, ribbon in hand. She didn't look up. He stepped in then, slow and steady, and set a sack of oats on the counter with a heavy thunk. "You need anything else?" he asked her, eyes never leaving Dodd. Clara blinked once, swallowed. "No," she said, "that's enough." They paid in coin and silence. Outside, the sun hit them hard again. The boy wanted to see the schoolhouse, said so quiet, almost like a question. The girl pointed at a flyer nailed to a post. Harvest Dance, Friday night. A world that kept moving whether they fit in it or not. A man in a deputy's badge stepped out from the saloon and leaned against a post. "You back for good, mister?" He nodded once. "Just passing through the season." The lawman looked to Clara. "She ain't yours." "She's not anyone's," he answered. The deputy spit in the dust and then walked off slow. He turned to Clara. "You all right?" She stared down the street, eyes fixed on nothing. "They know who I am." He didn't say, "I know too." Didn't need to. They loaded the wagon and rode out quiet. No one said goodbye. By the time the cabin came into view again, the mule was tired, the kids half asleep, and Clara hadn't spoken in hours. That night, he lit the fire, sat in the same chair he always did, and listened to her move around the room like a stranger in a place she already knew too well. She stood at the table, staring at her hands. "You said we could stay," she said, barely above the crackle of the logs. "I did." "But nothing follows us?" He looked into the flame. "Things always follow, but we decide what comes through the door." Outside, the dust of town had already blown east, scattered on wind and judgment. Inside, the cabin held its silence steady, like a man holding breath, like a family learning to exhale. The fire was down to coals. No supper left, just the smell of corn mush in the pot and the sound of a wind easing through the cracks. The children were asleep. Tommy curled under the bearskin with his mouth open, little Clara resting against the wall with her arms wrapped tight round her knees. He sat in the rocker, boots off, shirt unbuttoned halfway. The heat from the fire barely reached his chest. Across from him, Clara sat at the table, her back straight, eyes fixed on nothing. She looked tired in a way that sleep wouldn't fix. He watched her a long while before he spoke. "I built this place with my hands. Dug the posts, laid the stone myself. Meant it for more than just one man. Back then, I had a reason. She didn't answer, just traced a ring into the wood grain with her fingertip. I don't got much. Not money, not a good name in town. Just this land, a little soil, some hens that don't lay steady. He paused, took a breath, slow and low. But if you wanted it, it's yours, all of it, you and the children. Her eyes shifted, not surprised, just waiting to hear the rest. I ain't asking for nothing in return. Not love, not marriage, unless it's what keeps you safe. You don't owe me a thing. Just thought maybe you were tired of running. She leaned back in her chair, crossed her arms tight over her chest. You offering to keep us, or to own us? He didn't flinch. Ain't trying to own no one. I'm offering a roof, a place where you ain't looked at like a scar that won't heal. He stood, walked to the stove, added a log to the fire, watched the flame catch and swell before he turned back to her. You can say no. You can leave come morning. But if you stay, it's yours. This life, whatever shape it takes. She looked over at the sleeping children, then out the small window, where the moon hung low behind bare branches. I don't stay easy, she said, voice flat. Ain't never known how. Then start slow, he said. Start with stayin' one more day. She didn't answer, didn't nod, didn't move. But she didn't leave the table, didn't go pack her things. She just sat there with him as the fire burned back up and the wind outside fell quiet. Sometimes a yes don't sound like a word. Sometimes it just sounds like a woman not saying goodbye. The years didn't shout their passing. They just slipped by, soft as creek water smoothing stone. Clara stood in the yard, sleeves rolled, hammer in hand, driving a loose board back into the fence. Sweat gathered at her brow. Her arms, once thin and wary, now carried strength, earned, not gifted. Her hair had grown long again, braided tight down her back like she meant it that way. Little Clara, no longer so little, raced bareback across the pasture, hair flying like wildfire behind her. She rode like someone who'd never known what fear felt like. Tommy, taller now, near 10, sat by the barn, sharpening an old blade slow and steady, the way Mister had shown him. He was quiet, thoughtful, grew into stillness the way some boys grow into noise. Inside, supper simmered. Bread cooling on the windowsill. No grand talk, just the low hum of life being lived the hard but honest way. He came in from the field, hat in hand, clothes dusted from fence work, limp still in his step, but no longer dragging. His eyes followed the kids for a moment, then settled on Clara. She didn't speak, just handed him a cup of water and brushed the dirt from his shoulder with the back of her hand. That one touch said more than words ever could. They'd never married. No preacher had been asked, but her name was stitched into the family Bible now, just beneath his own. It was enough. There was a picture on the mantel. Took 2 winters back. All 4 of them stood in front of the cabin. No one smiled, but their eyes held peace. Beside it, a carving on a piece of pine. The Harris place. Tommy had done it himself. A second grave lay behind the house now, beside the first. Smaller, with a simple wooden cross. William, his son. Clara was the one who insisted they mark it proper. He needs to be remembered, she'd said, not just mourned. Come harvest, neighbors started sending word. Trades, extra eggs for cloth, a seed exchange. Clara taught reading to 3 families' children out near the creek on Sundays. Folks still whispered, but they came. He and Clara shared coffee in the mornings now. She'd rest her hand on his knee as they watched the sun rise slow over the ridge. Some evenings she'd catch his eye across the dinner table and he'd nod just once. A quiet agreement. We made it through another day. Life didn't come all at once. It came like the river, slow, carving its place, washing away what didn't hold. And somehow, along the bend, they'd built something out of the wreckage, something steady, something that didn't run. The land looked the same as it always had, Dry where it ought to be green, quiet where men once shouted, wide and unforgiving as the day he first stepped foot on it. The wind moved through the pines with that old restless hum, like it was still searching for something it had forgotten. He stood out near the edge of the pasture, leaning on the fence he'd rebuilt 3 times now. The boards were rougher, older, like his hands, but they held. So did he. Behind him, laughter from the porch. Tommy was fixing a fishing pole, showing a neighbor boy how to wrap the line right. Little Clara, nearly grown now, sat with her ma, mending a hem with needle and thread. Her braid flicked in the breeze, same as her mother's had that first year. Inside, a pie cooled. A Bible rested open. A lantern waited to be lit, same as always. He took off his hat and let the breeze catch what was left of his graying hair. The same ridge, the same sky, but everything beneath it had shifted. He closed his eyes. He thought he was rescuing them from the storm. But it turned out they'd rescued him. Back then, he didn't see it, couldn't. Thought himself too far gone, just a man with ghosts and a cabin full of silence. But they'd filled it, little by little, with questions and clumsy drawings, with burnt biscuits and mended fences, with hands that reached for his without fear. Now, when the wind came through, it didn't rattle the shutters the same, didn't sneak under the door like it used to. It was just wind. He looked up to where the clouds gathered slow along the ridge. A snowflake landed on his knuckle, light, harmless. He smiled, just a little, turned back toward the porch. The family he'd never asked for was waiting, and this time the storm stayed on the outside.